Greetings to you, my friends, wherever you may be in the world today. Welcome here to the splendid Sewell studios in Haiku, Maui, with my special guest, Jeff Kuhn, which I will introduce in segments here in the first opening few minutes, and then dive into this, for me personally, much anticipated, I want to say conversation, but primarily questions with this gentleman. And I know I speak for a lot of people who will watch this. Our fascination, I want to say, with life, but with the galaxies and the universe, and today with this radical intersection with psyche and consciousness and psychedelics, and children talking about the possibility of near-term anthropocentric extinction and the popularizing of physics through Professor Michio Kaku. We have today, I'm honored to say, a man who's dedicated his adult life to the study of astronomy, to astrophysics, from Columbus, Ohio. Went to school in his undergraduate at Kalamazoo University. And then, if I'm correct, master's degree and a doctorate in physics from Princeton, I think graduating in 1981. And if I may, just so that we're aware of his just research expertise, bear with my pronunciation, I did write them down, but there's a number of very specific things that he's skilled in, which I'll try to weave in questions and he'll speak more, but telescopes and optical instrumentation, solar magnetism, atmosphere, and helioseismology, the study of the dynamics of the sun through oscillations. Jeff is an expert on what keeps our food growing, what keeps us moderately suntanned with sunscreen, this very micro perfect climate based upon this sunball, I think some 96 million miles away. The man has studied the sun as many of us study a book on family systems and psychology. Very excited to be able to explore this man's mind. The physics of polarized light and circumstellar radiation. I'll let him explain that. Gravitational physics and dynamics. And my personal favorite, searching for extrastellar life. Jeff, if I'm correct, has, he's currently a professor of astronomy at the Institute of Astronomy and Astrophysics here in Hawaii.
Yeah, it's at University of Hawaii.
University of Hawaii. He's held posts, guest professor, speaker, in Germany, in Italy, in France, in Japan, I think in Korea as well. And I am honored to say that we have a very remarkable, rare mind. I met him some months ago here at a special dinner here at Tom and Michelle's home. And he is out here in Hawaii because of the Haleakala mountain crater here, where, if I'm correct, you are constructing a telescope. And that's super rad to me, super fascinating. So that's the introduction. Thank you for tuning in. And let's, I want to say dive in, but let's initiate a conversation. Where in an elementary way, what is the meaning of astrophysics, and what is the classical meaning of an astronomer?
Right. So if I was a plumber, I would spend my life learning about the techniques for creating the parts that make water, gases move from one place to the next. If I'm an astronomer, I learn about the techniques that allow us to understand and somehow remotely make sense of the things that are a long way from us. And just like in plumbing, it's about fluids. For astrophysics, it's mostly about optical radiation or radio radiation, but everything that we know about the universe up until just a few years ago, we knew from the light that we received, or the radio waves, or in some cases the particles that are emitted in massive cosmic explosions. That changed a few years ago. We, for the first time, learned about gravitational radiation, which is completely different than electromagnetic radiation, and it's a window into the universe that in the next 10 years is going to change the way that
So
we
gravitational radiation is a window into the universe. Can you say more about that?
Yeah, so
What is gravitational radiation?
well, let me say something about light and optics, and because that's this we know for almost 200 years that it's the variation of electricity and magnetism, that when they oscillate, they carry information. We call that light or radio waves. Everything from radio waves to infrared light to high energy X-rays are all the same thing. It's this oscillation of electricity and magnetism. Gravitational radiation is a different material or medium or part of the universe which is doing the oscillating. No longer is it electricity and magnetism. It's according to Einstein, it's the fabric of space and time, which is wiggling in a very minute way. And we believed that theoretically, but only a few years ago, 4 or 5 years ago, did we, for the first time, detect the variation of the space-time created by the collapse of two black holes together. And the energy that was released was enough to create this fabric of space-time oscillation that we can measure in very sensitive gravitational wave detectors. And the reason why that's a new window is because light, as you know, is easily blocked by intervening material. Something which is opaque doesn't transmit light. That's not true of gravitational radiation. It penetrates back in space and back in time, and it is really literally a new window into seeing, for example, what happens when black holes collapse. Why is that interesting? Well, what happens to space and time at these enormously different conditions from anything here in our existence lets us ask and then even try to answer questions about how quantum mechanics works, or how we came to be. The early phase of the universe is a complete mystery. The radiation that we see, which has been traveling through the universe for billions of years, still doesn't penetrate back and come from that time when conditions were enormously different. So our attempt to try and understand the universe under conditions very different than where we live now relies on having this new window, and that's a very exciting thing. I started out graduate school wanting to study gravity, and in fact studied the sun because the sun is big. It makes a lot of gravity because we know from Newton's laws that mass creates gravity, and so I started studying the sun because we thought we could get to certain conditions that we couldn't reproduce in other environments, and that would tell us something about gravity. As it turns out, mostly we were stymied by our lack of understanding of the sun. So when we saw something anomalous, we really were learning about the sun and not about gravity. But that was my random walk through science, was to now spend a big part of my life studying the sun.
Would you provide, well, let me just say this. I was recently reading the professor of physics at New York University, Michio Kaku's book on the God equation. And he presented in that the normal layperson's understanding of gravity is decidedly different than what we had thought. And it had completely confounded me. What is gravity?
Yeah. Well, you could ask what is electromagnetism, and we understand it from our own senses. Most of what we know about the universe is what we get with our eyes and our ears and our nose and our skin and how we taste the universe. It's from that limitation that we understand light. But that's the reason why we do physics, I think, is to extend our senses with other tools, and a lot of those tools are mathematics. Okay, so gravity, as we understand it, and as we can feel the pull of an object on our hand, that's our sense of touch that tells us what gravity is not a wrong perception of gravity, but under other circumstances, it turns out that it's better to think with mathematical tools that can describe not a sense of pull, but that if you build a fabric of space and time and you link them together, and the analogy that you may have seen is this idea that suppose you think of a sheet of rubber, and the gravity is a curvature in that sheet of rubber. Now, if you take the principle that all objects follow the path, we call it a geodesic path, but it's the path of least energy. It's a path of least distance in a general sense along that rubber sheet. Now the magic here is you have to kind of step out of living in the rubber sheet, but let's step out of the rubber sheet so we're not two-dimensional creatures feeling that curvature, and look at the curvature. And now imagine a particle moving along the rubber sheet that it encounters the dimple of a gravitating object. Well, we will see that it will move in a different path. It won't go in a straight line. It will follow the curvature of the rubber sheet and change its direction. If we were to live in the rubber sheet, you would see that object moving towards you, and you would say, oh, that's gravity, it's pulling it towards us. If you could step out into some higher dimension, you would say, oh, that's just moving along the curved path created by the mass. Right, okay. And so we can't put ourselves in extra dimensions to see the curvature of space and time in 3 dimensions. 3 plus 1 dimension, space plus time. But that's the analogy, that gravity is curving space and time, and objects, that thing that I feel on my hand, is just trying to follow that path in the curved space-time and producing the force on my hand. It's not that my hand, or that there is something that reaches out and pulls it. It's just that objects, massive objects, the Earth in this case, have created a curvature in space and time, and the motion of every object wants to follow that geodesic path, and that geodesic path is what looks to us and feels like force, but it's just moving in the curvature of space.
Bear with this question, but it just came to mind immediately listening to you. As you understand physics and astronomy and astrophysics and the nature of the context that we're all embedded, whatever you call that in your professional language, what is the intersection of astrophysics and consciousness?
Yeah.
And is there conversations about astrophysics and consciousness that give rise to the physics of anger, the physics of violence, and the absence of violence, and the absence of greed?
Yeah.
Is there an intersection going on today?
Well, so maybe there should be more than there is, but physicists and mathematicians have tried to understand the universe by separating consciousness from the physical world, and that's almost certainly a mistake. The mistake that we make throughout most of our so I'm a scientist, and I have the attitude that I should be able to, or I want to, pursue any question as it appears. And so I've done this walk from I want to know gravity to, well, the sun is the problem, so now I need to know the sun. And now I've learned about the instruments to be able to sense faraway places. And now I'm coming to the understanding that life and consciousness, the search for life outside of the solar system, is something that is very dear to me, and that's where my energy goes now. I'm pushing in that direction. because I think this question you ask of what is the connection between self-consciousness and the physical world is probably very central to a lot of the ideas that we're just beginning. So quantum mechanics, for example, that quantum mechanics is the science, well, we tend to think of it as the science of macroscopic tiny particles where the energy of the particle is close to this, the energy and the time that we look at things are close to this fundamental quantity we call Planck's constant. And Planck's constant from the beginning of the 20th century is a number that determines the kind of boundary between when an experiment sees spooky, weird quantum effects and other effects that we think of more like billiard balls and ordinary mechanics. It's our experience. Again, it's this notion that we need to push away from just the limitation of our five senses to see more of what the universe is doing. And your question, which is how does consciousness relate to the physical world, is of course a very deep question, and one that for the most part physics is not very well equipped to answer, even though everything that we know about the universe that goes into our mathematical and physical models of the world gets filtered by our consciousness. So it's clear that we're fooling ourselves a little bit when we try to ignore the question of self-consciousness against understanding the physical universe.
I know that there's been, over the years, some dialogue between prominent physicists and Buddhists.
Yes.
But having had a classical Buddhist moderate training, I'm reluctant to say training, because I'm just a student of that system on the outside. But the entire portal of the external universe is generally seen through the telescopic refinement of consciousness inside. Meditation is the refinement of consciousness. In all the classical Buddhist suttas, which has been divorced in the West, mindfulness has been decoupled from the esoteric systems of classical Theravada Buddhist and Tibetan Buddhism. But if you look at the traditional text, you may know there's 11,000 pages, the phantasmagorical psychic nature of many men and women who train their mind, duplicating their bodies, going through different dimensions of existence, having conversations with deities, and just manifesting things that look miraculous as normal because they trained their mind in how to do that.
Yes.
And
yes.
So this gave rise, bear with me, this gave rise to the West, to the convenient, what would be the word, the exploration of the psychedelic as catalyst to do what meditation did in a short period of time. Mm-hmm. And so many people today, like for example with the 5-MeO and DMT and high doses of psilocybin or acid, are all in conversation with deities. That's the common ground today. And so if I can with you, Jeff, just jump right into, you're a scientist, you're a professional. Are we alone in the universe? You study exoplanets, you're looking for life in Alpha Centauri. Your specialty is to explore extraterrestrial life. Can you say something for all of us about what you found?
Well, okay.
And what you're finding?
Yeah, so about 5 years ago, there was a remarkable paper, which the scientific. So first off, right, scientists are trained to try to separate the physical universe from the metaphysical universe.
Okay.
There is a natural barrier, which is in some ways just a reflection of I don't know how to cross that barrier with the mathematical tools that I'm trained with.
Interesting. Yeah.
But I think there is amongst many scientists a clear understanding that the further we get into trying to understand things, the more we know that we can't understand them just with the tools that we have of mathematics and the rational deduction that goes in the usual process of physics. And there's a wonderful theorem by Gödel. It's the Gödel Undecidability Theorem that philosophers, I think, have extracted the wisdom from, and better than I have. But the theorem says that if you start with any logical system that has a set of axioms, that for any logical system, and Gödel proved this with some generality, and maybe I'm overstating it to say any logical system, but that's what I believe. That if you take any logical system, you can state questions, you can phrase sentences in the language of that logic. If it's arithmetic, then you can write down an arithmetic equation. If it's geometry, you can create a geometric statement. And there are statements that are not provable within that language. In other words, our belief that we can construct an understanding of any question we can ask in physics is clearly not true. That we have to go beyond what we see and what we think we can ask about to understand an answer to whether it's true or false.
Okay.
So right there, that says we have a problem that is this sort of infinitude. When you talk about, through a psychedelic experience, learning or seeing things that we only know how to describe as deities, we don't know how the brain works. And it could very well be that the brain has this ability to do things that is there because it's protecting the identity. It's part of what's essential to make my identity separate from yours. But we're learning that. Let's take quantum mechanics and Bell's theorem. Bell's theorem, as we've learned, tells us that there are these very peculiar connections between one part of the universe and another part of the universe that have nothing to do with the speed of light or have to do with we still believe in causality. We still believe that something here can affect something there at the speed of light. But it is certainly true that Bell's theorem, which has even classical analogs, can point us to the notion that there is a connectedness that is transcendent to the classical understanding that we have of the universe, that physicists would like to be able to show that what happens on Alpha Centauri is not connected to anything here because it's too far away, and but then we have these possibilities of noting this. It's not exactly a correlation, but it's a connectedness that is not at all classical. So the first thing that I would say is that when we see things that seem to violate our understanding of physics, it's even in physics we grapple with the mysteries of.
So we should, what I'm hearing you, we should consider that it's an unrecognized metapsychology of the brain?
I think the brain and its connection to the universe is something that we don't understand at all. They're very simple and fundamental questions about self-consciousness that just, they fascinate me. One of them I think about all the time is, why do we dream? Why do we sleep? Every object that has self-consciousness, as far as we can learn, has this requirement to disconnect from our senses and go back into something that is in bees. It's known, for example, that bees that have 1/10,000th of the number of neurons that we have they require sleep. They apparently dream to the extent that the people that study bees have been able to track that down. If you deprive bees of sleep, they're very bad at finding and listening to the directions from their neighbors and dance to know where to find the honey. Self-consciousness is, and what the brain is capable of doing are clearly a fundamental part of understanding the universe that I think we're only beginning to touch. And what you could do with psychedelics, I think, is to change the barriers that the brain puts up, right? With the proper psychedelic, we destroy the ego and we remove the barrier that keeps, maybe protects our self-identity. You might ask, why is it that life evolves so that we have separate existence, that we don't have direct mental connection. And so there's a lot about the universe and self-consciousness that is, I think, we have to break the barrier between understanding the physical universe and what happens in our brain. And I think, but you asked about Alpha Centauri, and let me tell you so this paper showed that there is an evolution of complexity in life, that if you measured the complexity of a being, of a life form on the Earth, one way of measuring it is by counting the number of distinct base pairs in the DNA. Our DNA that we transfer to our offspring is, if we were hundreds of years older, would be the main part of their ability to survive. We teach survival through our DNA. That's no longer true. The information that we impart to our offspring now comes from the world around us, the electronics, the books, the teaching. There's much more information now that's available to us that it doesn't have anything to do with our DNA. But nevertheless, up until this era in the history of the Earth, survival was passed on primarily by DNA. And the evolution of the number of base pairs has grown exponentially. It doubles in species every few million years. So you can trace that curve back, and you can ask, well, when did life emerge based on this? It's like Moore's law for electronics. There's a Moore's law, it seems, for biological evolution. That's a controversial statement, but I do believe that. If you trace it back, you find out that life, the first elements of the information that you could put into DNA, it crossed zero about 10 billion years ago. The Earth is only 5 billion years. And if you now think about the principle of our understanding of our place in the universe, well, as individuals, we're born into a very tiny universe, and we believe that the universe is all us. We are very special in that sense. And our mothers teach us that we're very special. And the process of getting older, to me, is the process of learning how unspecial I am. That it's realizing that there's a richness and a capability and a world that makes me very small. In the words of Douglas Adams, I don't know if you're a Douglas Adams fan, but there's in one of his books, maybe so long and thanks for all the fish, there's an event where the torture for Beeblebrox was to put him into a machine the size of a phone book that would show his tininess with respect to the universe. And that was meant to be the ultimate torture for us.
Oh my goodness.
And maybe that's what death is, the realization that but then it's not we, because what we learn through these experiences is that in fact we are connected in ways that we just can't, that get filtered by the consciousness that we have. So life didn't emerge on the Earth, is what this means, because the Earth is 5 billion years old.
So please say more about life didn't emerge on Earth.
Well, life evolved on the Earth, but
it didn't start here.
It didn't start here, and I think that the first evidence of RNA and DNA that could replicate and do this thing that we call life, which is to pass on survival skills through DNA, goes back. If you follow this curve from Sharif and Gordon, it goes back 10 billion years. The Earth is only life. We know from the records of the oceans that we only had 3.8 billion years here. So where did it come from? Well, we're part of a cosmic ecology, not just the ecology here in Haiku, but an ecology with us and other. So I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit, but in our lifetime, the big advance in astronomy, and the thing that has pulled me to other problems, is the realization that when you look up in the sky, there are more planets than there are stars. When I was a graduate student, we were taught that, well, Earth is terribly special, and that the conditions to create a planet around a star are almost impossible, and then the conditions to create life are almost impossible.
And is a planet and an exoplanet a different concept?
An exoplanet is just a planet around a different star. than
But it
ourselves.
doesn't mean, what is the name for a planet that could be habitable or that it could be
Yeah.
bringing life? What is
So,
the name of
but
that?
we don't, all we know is the life that we know, right? So there's this principle that I think we need to elevate into a law.
This is
and that is-
cosmic ecology?
Well, the principle I'm going to enunciate is that we're not special by any measure. We are not
Meaning
special.
that we're not alone.
Well, special to me means unique. Yeah, yeah. So being alone is the same thing. And you know, history is taught us that when we used to think that we were the center of the solar system, right? And then we got a more perspective. We had telescopes, and we realized, no, we're not solar at the center of the sun. The sun is at the center.
And are you representing classical astrophysical wisdom in what you're sharing, that 3.8 billion years of Earth, it points to a 10 billion years prior to that, the cosmic ecology, life is elsewhere?
The biologist, and this is a controversial statement, this is why it's so important to look up and find evidence of life, because so our understanding of the universe as far as finding life is like this sphere progressing outwards as our technology gets better and better.
Spare me this, but isn't the evidence not sufficient, but the evidence that we are life means that there is other life? Is it implicit in that?
I think what you said is a true statement, but there are people that believe that it was some kind of cosmic coincidence, that the conditions were just right on the Earth, that we somehow the surface of rocks and life evolved on it.
I'm sorry.
No.
Go ahead.
Life
There we go.
Life evolved in the ocean on a surface. So the biologists recognize that there's these they're miracles, the probability of the molecules coming together to create RNA and then DNA, which is essential to sending the information from. Some believe that that's so unlikely that it could only have happened once in the universe, and that we represent that. Now,
So there's no Earth, yet there is life elsewhere, here, simultaneously, and somehow the Earth formed, and life as we see it has come to this present expression. Where does cosmological ecology and evolution as we know it merge?
right. So I don't believe that life on Earth is unique. I'm a strong believer that the process of growing older and learning is learning how non-special and non-unique we are. Science,
Again, please help me, and the listener is, non-special means that there is other life.
yes,
That's all.
It means,
We're not the center of the entirety.
or in the case of learning about where the Earth is, we used to think that we were at a special place, the center of the universe, and we're not.
Right.
So I think the idea that we're building into how we think now is that whenever we tend to think that we're in a special place could be that we're the only place where life evolved. But there are many biologists, I would say, that do believe that, and part of my interest in the search for life problem is to prove that that's not the case. So if you take this picture that we're part of a cosmic ecology, then the way that the life on one planet communicates with life on another planet is through, for example, the exchange of cometary material. So we don't quite know how the biological molecules that carry DNA or carry the first cyanobacteria that appeared in the oceans of the Earth made it and survived into the ocean, but I have no doubt that that's just a technical detail.
So that is your evidence of life that exceeds life as we know it on this planet. That there was something in the oceans way back that had to come from somewhere else because there was no Earth.
Because there wasn't enough time.
Say more about that. What do you mean?
So the origins of life, if I believe how complexity evolves in DNA, go back 10 billion years, but the Earth has.
Why do you say 10 billion years?
Well, because
I'm
just
gives you the information of 10.
Okay, so Moore's law is this relationship that says.
How do we know 10 billion years when the Earth has only been here 3.9?
Exactly. So I'm gonna get to that. But there's an analogy. So the analogy is called Moore's law and the evolution of the amount of information that exists on our planet. Information stored in cell phones, books, CDs, the evolution and the complexity of your cell phone. And it's pretty clear that about every 3 years, the amount of information doubles.
Okay.
So we could say, all right, so if it doubles every 3 years, when did information technologies emerge on the Earth? And it turns out, if you follow that line back, guess where it intersects? Zero. No, that information line intersects the time of the invention of the printing press and books.
Okay.
So over many generations, the evolution of information and a doubling time of three years gives us the sort of 1500s as the emergence of storage technologies for information.
Okay.
All right. So for life, the complexity that we're measuring is the doubling of the number of important functional base pairs in our DNA. And if you do the same exercise and you follow it back, it goes back 10 billion years. So the emergence of the mechanism for biological complexity dates back about 10 billion years, according to Sharif and Gordon.
Okay, allow us, what, from your decades of research and study, what evidence do you and your colleagues have for life beyond our planet?
Right. So we don't have any yet, because
UFO phenomena has proven that we don't know what it is, but there's 5% of those we don't know what it is.
And the UFO phenomenon is a distinct area that I have no expertise in and I can't comment on.
And then there's the whole Eastern philosophy over decades and centuries.
Yes, and that's somehow this connection, this sort of primordial information that may be there somehow because we came from a comet 3.8 billion years ago. My point is that the evolution of our life takes longer than the age of the Earth or the oceans. And
the evolution of our life takes longer than the age of the evolution of the ocean.
There's not enough time to make species of our complexity unless it got a head start from a comet when it popped into the ocean.
Got it. And so life on the Earth is like how far back as we know it?
The life on the Earth we know started 3.8. The earliest fossil evidence we have.
3.8 billion.
3.8 billion years. And that was very simple 10,000, 100,000 base pairs in cyanobacteria. And there wasn't enough time to get back to the evolution of that life.
Got it. Okay.
So we know from astronomy that comets can travel between star systems. So to have an ecology, you have to, like on the Earth, the wind has to blow spores from one place to the next. There has to be some connection between the life outside and the life here. We eat it or it eats us, and that's the connection.
So that's the cosmological Uber effect.
It's the ecology, this cosmic ecology.
The interpenetrating pollinization.
Yes.
Okay.
And so if life is part of a cosmic ecology, then that means that life on the nearest stars and the planets around the nearest stars should be detectable. But the reason why we haven't detected it in the mainstream science with our tools is that our technology hasn't quite been there yet. The universe is still dark to us for finding life with conventional science.
Because our tools are not as sophisticated to penetrate the
Exactly,
universe.
and that's my passion for telescopes. So now we have this emerging technology for building optical instruments that can find the signatures of life around these, we call them exoplanets, planets around other stars. And we now know, unlike 20 years ago, 25 years ago, that nearly every star has an exoplanet. So how can it be that there is not life out there? How can the universe not be teeming with life? Well, so there are lots of ways of answering that. So one of there's this thing people talk about, which I think is absurd, which is this Fermi Paradox. Is that bad?
No, good.
The Fermi Paradox is this idea that, well, if the universe was filled with life, then why aren't they walking? Why aren't they talking to us? Why don't we have mainstream evidence of the existence of that life? And there's several answers to that. One of them is that the barrier to getting that life here is enormous. So a problem I have with
the pure mechanics of getting life
the
here.
energy required to get a single spaceship is the entire energy budget of the planet for years. So I'm working with a group that wants to send a probe at 20% of the speed of light to Alpha Centauri. And the energy required to send a 1 gram probe.
1 gram.
1 gram. 1 gram. Right?
Okay.
Is essentially the entire energy budget of the country for a few seconds.
Massive.
And it's a massive laser system, and it's.
But correct me, can't the energy source be something other than on the Earth? Can it just be light from a star?
But here's the point: to travel, to take any mass and move it at velocities close to the speed of light, is enormous amounts of energy. And if you take the problem in a different way and you ask, well, if life is really about information, if you distill it down, it's not your body or my body. It's the information that we carry.
Absolutely.
Right? And you read or talked or thought about this evolution towards a singularity.
That's
right? That Kurzweil and others talk about, where we're within 20 or 30 years of having the power to take all of the information in our lives and put it into a small
completely
bundle.
Downloading the neural maps and everything.
Of course, and we're sort of, right, the passion that we all have to be connected to the internet, right, is just that first step. It makes life bigger. It makes the information that we have bigger. So somehow understanding life, to me, involves understanding information and the emergence of self-consciousness. So there's more to life than just information, because we have what we call self-consciousness. Where does that come from? In my way of thinking about life, I think of self-consciousness as emergent, that any collection of information which has enough complexity, enough richness, will create its own self-consciousness.
I see. Interesting.
And that self-consciousness maybe requires a filter, and maybe we all have to sleep and dream because there's some element of self-consciousness that has this restriction to how information gets used and connected. I don't know, but the point I'm trying to make is that the life that exists on other exoplanets near us made its way to us biologically through the comets that we know exist and that carry the biological molecules that turn into. Once life was introduced, once the seed was planted, evolution changes, and so our life here is probably different. It's shaped by the environment. It's shaped by the conditions that exist.
Bear with this very simple question. Your passion to discover coexistence with our own in, say, the nearest star system, Alpha Centauri, something like 3.5 billion light years away.
It's 3.5 light years.
3.5 light years, so relatively close. The closest.
It is the closest.
Okay, cool. What do you anticipate if you were to enrich your fascination? What encounter are you looking for or hoping for, or how would you even know there was an encounter with life?
Well, so the first question is, if we believe we're part of an ecology, then we should find evidence of that ecology. And our information capabilities are just reaching the point where we can build the telescope, the optical system, to find evidence of life, to find what we call biosignatures.
Biosignatures. So you're looking for the most rudimentary level of what life in the ocean.
No, I'm looking for more than that, because I believe that the Earth was seeded probably in the same time scale as other nearby exoplanets, 3.5 to 10 light years away. So I have every reason to believe that the life that is there is evolved. So here's another.
So there's some proximity to our own evolution. Well, our own.
Yeah. And I here's another zinger. Is technology an essential part of the evolution of life? I think it probably is. And I think that as we follow this exponential curve of complexity, the reason why we don't have aliens every day amongst us in the general scheme of things is that because we're evolving, and in 40 years life will look incredibly different. And I believe that in other systems the laws of evolution will build technology, life and technology. So the sort of wet chemistry that we are is merging with the what we think of as external, but which is really internal, because we're connected to all of that. And life will emerge into something which makes us much more a collection of information. We become some would say we become godlike, or we extinct ourselves, and another species comes up to
It begs the question of the efficacy of our own probing. What is important and why? For example, here we are, many people know, I'm not sure where you stand on this, that we're on the cusp of, and some even say that we're already baked into a sixth mass extinction, not just the human, but lots of other species. Some say that. I'm not saying that I do or don't, but it feels that the information is relatively provocative.
But let's talk about that.
Okay, one sec though. Let me just loop back around and yes, it's fascinating to imagine and probe what you're doing. It just takes me into high passion. That's been a lot of my meditative, bear with me, my meditative, psychedelic, highly careful, dosed, set exploration of consciousness, where I've filmed friends and myself in conversation with deities. And I've been in meditative circles where you see them, you feel them, but it's not the priority. My question is, Jeff, here we are on the brink of potentially a World War III and nuclear threats, and we're already talking about the possibility of an extinction. The efficacy of our collective efforts right now should be on how to understand human consciousness to decode the de-escalation towards self-annihilation. And I'm wondering, in your field, where is their meaning? Where is the purpose?
Okay.
Where's the morality in it?
So first, I have a hard time with the word moral.
Okay, good.
Because
all you want.
Because morality to me is incredibly subjective. We can define what we believe to be the proper principles for life, but if I go somewhere else on the planet, I think I'll get a different definition. So to me, morality is a very slippery subject, and to be honest, I don't know how to define morality.
Well, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the blueprint for democratic societies.
And I believe in all of that, and
freedom.
I would like to
freedom from fear.
I would elevate that. But the point I wanted to go back to before, when you asked, well, what is the morality of science and the questions that we ask? And earlier we said, well, to attain enlightenment, we can meditate, we can turn our thoughts inwards to learn about our brain, or it's possible we can accelerate that process, right, with ayahuasca or other drugs. And I believe in both of those, but I think there's a third. And the third is an attempt to get to the brain from the physical universe. And that the morality of trying to understand the cosmic ecology that we're part of. If, for example, we get this capability to look out to tens of light years for evidence of biosignatures and we find nothing, what does that tell us about our existence? If we find nothing that looks like life, it could mean that we really better do what you say and figure out whether it's possible that we're ready to extinct all of the life on this planet, because everywhere else the natural tendency is with life to develop technology and power.
This is very interesting. See, this begs the question for me, and I've been joking about it on stages and theaters and various things, like the Dalai Lama, for example. He's the 14th incarnation of himself.
Yes.
And it's always interesting to me that he's a man of peace and kindness, but no one really asks him, would you explain, please, to scientists and astrophysicists and people who really understand biological wisdom and all the integrations of all these things, how do you know, and how do your people in Tibet and in Dharamsala know that you are, in fact, an emerging recreation of a man that's discernible as I'm the 14th Dalai Lama? Am I Alan Clements the 13th? Are you Jeff Kuhn to 700?
But
isn't that an important probe?
That is an important probe.
Why aren't people asking him that?
Because we don't have the tools. I don't have the tools.
It's just a question. Sir, please explain to me, how do you know you're the 14th?
And I would say that we are all interconnected in ways that we have no understanding of.
But he's saying he knows for sure, and an entire world is worshiping this man.
Well, that's this balance. So civilization in the science world.
Is that magical thinking for you?
It's faith. It's faith.
So you don't believe it comes into any discernible information that they could articulate?
I don't know. I've never.
If you were to put your kind of infrared telescope on the Dalai Lama, what do you get?
It's a good question. How do we transcend consciousness? How do we do that? And maybe it's true that there's vestiges of the cyanobacteria that came from a nearby planet buried in me somewhere. But I tend to believe that everything that we do is to understand those connections. And the Dalai Lama and what is built into us, it's obviously built into us. We carry the experience of the extinction of the dinosaurs in us. We carry somehow the origins of life on this planet with the comet that deposited cyanobacteria. All of that is in us. We just can't see it. And somehow the information that is us, the existence of self-consciousness somehow requires the erection of barriers that prevent me from directly thinking your thoughts and seeing your thoughts. And when we break those down with chemicals or through a deeper understanding that comes from the physical world penetrating this inability to see what self-consciousness is.
Do you, not to put you on, but do you believe or have studied or experienced the psychic intuitive? The whole thing they call in Buddhist psychology the abhinya, duplicating your bodies, going through space and time, going through walls, appearing in two places at the same time. Do you believe in that?
I do believe
like Ramdas was on this island and died, and his guru, Maharaji, was supposedly taking $100 bills out of fire. Is that magical thinking to you, or he was in a delusional acid state, or?
Look,
no idea.
I know from my own experience, say with ayahuasca, that there is a lot more in the brain than what I can understand.
So the psychedelic astrophysical merging with meditation, that study could parallel the astrophysical study that you do through your telescopic?
I think.
Do you think it's imperative that we do that?
I don't know where they meet.
But science should be bringing them
Science
together.
needs to understand what self-consciousness is.
Okay.
We need, and in the dialogue of Bell's theorem and the interconnectedness somehow of disjoint points in space and time, there is a dialogue about what is self-consciousness and what is measurement. What is the relationship between a measurement and knowledge of information and what we call life. they're profound questions, and I think that the Dalai Lama and the spiritual and the psychic tools that you use are coming at that barrier from inside the brain.
You know, when I went to the University of Virginia, Dr. Ian Stevenson, the psychiatrist there who studied the paranormal,
Right.
and he set teams of people around the world, you might know of him, where they studied the concept of rebirth in parapsychology.
Yeah.
And I've met people, even when I was a monk in Sri Lanka, one of his case studies of a young man who spontaneously was able to speak an ancient dialect of the Palis Budi language at like age 4.
Yeah.
And he brought in monks to have, this is extraordinary. Where does all that fit into the world that you study?
Okay, so here's an analogy. In the world of physics, we think of things as happening independently, but think about a billiard table and the balls on the billiard table, and you hit with the cue ball, you hit the balls, and they appear to move randomly, but they're not moving randomly. Right? If you knew exactly how the cue ball was coming and how the other balls were touching, you would be able to know that this ball over here is over there because of the interaction and the way it was set up when the cue ball hit all 15 balls, and that it's not independent. Mm-hmm. And we tend to think of, well, I'm independent, but I'm not independent. There are these we think of it as entanglement. There is an entanglement between all of us, which I feel like I could walk over here freely, and this room is freely available to me, but it's not. Right. There is a connection that you may call spiritual between
deep
you and I. There are interconnections that my mind might be aware of, but it doesn't give me because of some need to feel like I'm not entangled. Somehow these entanglements exist in the physical world, and they exist in our life world in a way that allows for this sort of magical ideas that we see as not magic, just because our brain is filtering that from us.
It's interesting you use the word entanglement. You know, like one of the classic Buddhist meditative texts called the Visuddhimagga, the Path of Purification, starts with the Buddha supposedly sharing that there is a great entanglement in this world. It's in consciousness.
Yes, that's something. Yes.
And he says that this book and this teaching is about how to untangle the tangle of greed, anger, and delusion.
Yes.
And therein lies you'll understand the nature of life.
Yes.
And you know, it's hard not to be, especially on Maui, bear with me, to be on a psychedelic, on a dose of psychedelic, even just the purity of just your own being, and look out at this stellar system out here where you just feel like you're in space. I guess it's so obvious. I'm talking like a kindergarten student. And it's given me so much youthfulness, Jeff, a restorative innocence and wonderment. That's why I'm very fascinated about you and your work and the work of your colleagues and your telescope, is because you are taking the universe so seriously. You're like a passionate monk or nun in a monastery for me. And the merger of these fields, because you know we know a little bit about each other, the merger of these fields, I'm not suggesting that it's merged for you, but the meditative lens, the trans-spiritual religious meditative lens, not just mindfulness, esoteric mindfulness that's willing to probe and feel the intuitive, and the training of mind to expand luminosity, anti-psychic gravity through fear. And then I'm not down with ayahuasca as a substance personally, it's too visual. I like low-dosing DMT, smoking it, coupled with various other substances, coupled with setting and context and synergy between similar-minded people where you transcend your individuality and put, you know, this is your field, not mine, but I've only been introduced in the last several years to thought experiments. And that's what's missing for me is people who are willing to set aside their opinions pretty much and bring together the classic catalysts, if you will, of meditation, yoga, fasting, dialogue, listening, psychedelic, and language and tonality, auditory vibration, and to document the evidence of these kind of existential psychedelic soirees, if you will. And can we discover what I'm looking to you to discover, life in the universe, meaning in what are we here for? And how can we decode, coming back, looping around, coming back to you, how can we untangle this catastrophic blindness in the psyche of killing each other in the name of a delusion? Because we're killing life in the name of freedom.
So this is another great question. What is delusion? I struggle with that. What in my understanding is delusional? How can I recognize something that is delusional from something which isn't delusional? And I know that...
Well, you see something and you see it wrongly, and then you mislabel that wrongness as right.
I get that. But I think that
it's still relative, probably. But
there is no litmus test to know what may be my. It may be delusional that I think that I can find people that want to put up $1 billion to build this telescope that we want. But yet I'm going to do that. I'm going to make my delusion reality.
Yeah. So probably push comes to shove. Like I've been temporarily in areas of extreme conflict. And delusion is, I don't want to be killed, harmed, or raped.
Yes.
And so there's a psychic, ethical line there of conscience and dignity and self-identity.
Yes. And those principles maybe we're talking about delusion in a different sense of the word, but certainly those are principles that all developed life should live by. But to be honest, right, if we look at the geological record, 98% of all species extinct. They go away. They die. So there were several episodes in the geological history where more than 75 or 80% of all species vanished over the course of the geological record that we know about.
But breath away.
But it's a fact. It's a fact, and it's not a delusion. And part of that says that when we know that we shouldn't be rooting for our own lives. We're all going to die. That's the only thing that we have to do, is die. That's the only thing that with certainty we will do. But so I shouldn't be rooting for my life. I shouldn't be rooting for the life of my town or my village. I shouldn't be rooting for the life of my country. I shouldn't be rooting for the life of Homo sapiens. I should be rooting for my ecology. I am not an existence separate from all of the ecology that feeds me and gives me an environment to think in and connect.
Well, that's the perennial question is dignified ethical coexistence.
And so that is also related to this question of morality. And I in the end I say I root for my ecology. I root for the evolution towards something which I think happens to connect us.
You're a principled scientist then.
Well, there's
non-violence means a lot to you.
Oh yeah. But I think that there's this connectedness that we all are searching for one way or the other through the entanglement and understanding and seeing the entanglement is also related to me to a question which I struggle with, which is how much free will do I really have? I am a product of my evolution and my circumstance, and I am what I have to be. Now, I have some control over that, I believe, within the uncertainty built into the universe by quantum mechanics. If quantum mechanics didn't exist, and I believed literally in physics, this idea that we had free will might be something we should debate. Now, I believe that I do have free will, but I don't believe I have as much free will as I think I have. And that's connected to the question of morality also, right? Maybe Hitler had to be Hitler.
Can I jump around to an existential question, because I don't get to ask this very much. You know, one of my little pet raves and rants is that because the system is inbuilt with greed, fear, disease, rape, genocide, massacres, domination, extinctions like you expressed, to me, it's a bad video game. It's a bad design. Okay, now my question is, if I were the designer of the cosmos, I would take out suffering. I would take out rape. Even one rape is one too many for me. I don't see any efficacy or wisdom that a person's body is violated by someone else's desire. And set aside galactic extinctions and lightning that takes people's heads off and fries bodies, car accidents, all of these things. It's the calamity of the universe. I've struggled. This is why I became a monk early on, because Buddhism explained that it's a bad design. And that the only thing that you can do with it is to enlighten yourself, to extract the idea of someone in it, the whole notion of I and other. My question is, and really help me with this, is I know about black holes a little bit, and I play with the concept I've heard recently of a white hole. Is it possible that we are entrapped in a configuration of dimensions, call it the universe or string theory, that's confined to physics, as you know, I don't know the physics, we're confined to a set of intersecting physics, but shouldn't we be exploring a world, a universe out of this physics rather than one in it? Because it's all defined by suffering, by change, by impermanence, by extinction, by death, by suffering, by war, by megalomaniacs. It's a bad design. Why are we living in it? Why not explore a universe beyond it? Imagine creating a world beyond suffering.
I think that's what we're doing, isn't it? We are what we are. We have what we have. We are an embodiment of all of the circumstance that existed before us. And we can say that it's a bad design, but that is a moral judgment, and I don't know how to make that moral judgment.
It brings up the whole issue of like Clockwork Orange and having
Well, yeah, lots of things that are happening now. We're going to have the ability to engineer the next generation through genetic modification, and we're going to be able to, and I think that I keep coming back to the principle that I'm going to do the best I can based on my vision of the universe, and that's my job. And the chances are I will die. It's more than likely that Homo sapiens will go extinct based on previous principles. But that doesn't mean that somehow the universe doesn't go on and get better. Maybe the minor birds will figure out a way forward. My hope...
Yeah, what does getting better mean to you?
Good question, and I think that I can't answer that. Getting better means that somehow I did what I could do. Somehow it means what's the meaning of life and our existence, and somehow the answer to that has to do with you played a role in this massive construct in a way that advanced it. We have this vision, I think, somehow, and it's certainly true in Hawaii, that, okay, I'm here, stop the boat, let's make things the way they are. We have this innate desire, because we are just a snapshot in time, that the world should be the way we think it should be. But nowhere in the history of the universe has there been any constancy. So when we say that a good universe is one where there is no suffering, it's never existed. It's something that we construct in our minds because of that snapshot of time where we live. And
is it possible that there is context? I don't have the language for something beyond language and description, obviously within our bandwidth of knowledge and brain. But in your field, with science and colleagues in the world that you live, is there a field of science, a field of astrophysics, cosmological ecology that imagines the possibility of universes beyond our physics?
Yeah, we talk about the idea of a multiverse. We talk about the idea that if we combine quantum mechanics and understanding this sort of disconnected principle of Bell's theorem, that it must mean that there are an infinitude of universes. I don't think there's much gain to be putting my time and energy into those
that.
thoughts, because I think we're so far away from having the tools in physics to address the things we talked about earlier, like consciousness. There are areas where the existence of life and self-consciousness and the physical universe should be more understandable than they are, and physics is incomplete. Again, I so go back to Gödel's theorem, right? We're asking questions, you're asking questions that, according to Gödel's theorem, I think physics will never answer. Physics and the idea that there could be a just universe out there, we just have to get to it. Physics won't help you with that.
And even like with advanced artificial intelligence, with exceeding the information base put together in a new kind of system, could bring up a question like that?
I think that you're asking a really interesting question when you talk about artificial intelligence, because in my naive understanding, I think that self-consciousness emerges with the complexity of information that is interconnected by processes. I believe that self-consciousness of some form will emerge when we reach some threshold of complexity, and that's this notion that life and the external universe get integrated. So the singularity notion is that we will soon have machines that create concepts and ideas that our brains are incapable of understanding, unless we can merge the capability of creating such ideas that are so complicated, colors that we can't see, smells that we can't smell, that transcend our own experience. Unless we can merge that technology with our minds, then we'll be left behind. And it's at that point that we're going to have to solve the question of what is self-consciousness, because it won't be too long before our sons and daughters will be given the opportunity of, you're about ready to die, would you like to take everything that's in your brain and upload it into a machine? Now, does that become you? Does that have the self-consciousness that you have? I think most people believe just the way we want to be connected to the internet. I suspect that given that option, we'll take it, and life will change. Life and evolution will change drastically. If you think that evolution, a feature of evolution is the creation of what we call technology, control of the world outside us, but the world outside us is really part of us. So I don't see it as necessarily a bad thing, but it's an essential thing that will happen.
What is death?
I want to think that there's a symmetry. What was before I was born? What will be after I die? I want to think that death is my final breakdown of this barrier of self-consciousness to seeing the entanglement that exists. So I imagine that death is suddenly the revelation that the entanglement puts us in the universe completely.
So am I hearing myself or you or together that death is not only relative, it's a non-existent experience? Is there a reality to death?
Certainly for those that are left behind when I die.
But what about for the organism called Jeff Kuhn and Alan Clements? Who dies?
I think we recognize.
Does self-consciousness continue?
I don't know. It doesn't have to. It wouldn't be a disappointment if suddenly I become godlike, in the sense that I am now interconnected to everything. And maybe I lose self-consciousness, or maybe it just changes into something else. I'm not sure, but it's clear that we must die, and there's a reason why we must be born and we must die for the rules of the universe. That our lifespan is defined by turtles can live a long time. Other species can live a long time because of their sensitivity to changes in the environment. If we lived forever, there would be no evolution. There would be no no change.
So you see it as a fundamental intrinsic beauty that death is an organic existential reality.
It has to be.
It has to be.
It has to be.
How interesting.
It has to be. Without death, there wouldn't. I don't think self-consciousness in life would exist if we didn't have this thing that we call
So is
death.
it fair to say that you have no fear of death? You're down with it.
I'm down with it. Because I
It's
don't have a
nature.
choice at some level, right?
It's nature.
It's nature. It's essential. I have to die because otherwise, if we didn't die, there would be no change. There would be no evolution. There would be no motion towards the godlike state that we will
How do
eventually
those two
achieve.
coexist? Why does my death or your death or the death of other humans or animals implicitly mean evolution towards something better?
Look, I think my fear of death is based on a fear of change. We have built into us a fear of change.
Beautiful. That's intrinsic enlightened Buddhist thought. Isn't it? Yeah, that's it. They say if you understand anicca or change or impermanence, the heightened intelligence of that at a felt level is wisdom, and the wiser you have a relationship to anicca, the less fear you'll have of the idea of dying or discontinuity. It's based on that ratio.
Well, I know some Buddhism from your book, but I need to learn more.
Well, you know, we've been talking for nearly an hour and a half, and it's been feeling like 5 minutes. So,
Okay.
but a few more if I can.
Yeah.
Where are your current passionate edges? I've only listed a few things that I read on your website and about you online, but what gets you out of bed in the day right now?
Yeah.
What's your passion?
So all of my life energy is devoted to the notion of creating. I believe that we are on the edge of having, call it the technology, but it's an understanding of how to be able to find life in the universe. We have the capability of creating instruments, call them telescopes, although the telescopes that I want to build are a combination of non-standard things. And I think that we can create something which will find evidence of life on the nearest 100 or 200 stars within 10 years. We just have to put it together. So the Big Solar Telescope was a project that I pushed starting 24 years ago. This project we call the ExoLife Finder, the ELF telescope. We started pushing about 5 years ago. If the cycle from idea to instrument is sort of 25 years, I could live long enough to see that done. I'm starting a program in the Canary Islands. We're going to build a group there to put together the technology that we need and hopefully build that telescope with a group of, it's very interdisciplinary. It follows from biomimetics, the idea that we have to think in ways that isn't just incremental, but is exponential. And the pattern for doing that is biological concepts for creating the structures that are stiff enough to hold the optics. So we have biologically trained mechanical engineers that know about things like concepts we call tensegrity. We have folks that are well versed in machine learning to be able to control we say the wavefront of these telescopes. We need the ideas of machine learning to be built into the telescope structure. So if all goes well, in about 6 months, I'll start spending half of my life in the Canary Islands, and we'll put together this group. I have hopes that Yuri Milner and the Breakthrough Foundation will actually matriculate their ideas into building a probe that will eventually make its way to Alpha Centauri.
Okay, now this telescope that you know so well, it's not land-based, it's out in space.
No. It turns out that for and it's a common misconception that we have to go to space to do these problems. For this problem, we require very, very large optics. And putting very, very large optics in space is something that even if Elon Musk succeeds in getting to the cost per kilogram to get to above the Earth's atmosphere that he says, it still would be too expensive. For this.
So this is land-based telescope.
This is a land-based system in the Canary Islands.
Okay. Basic question, bear with me. How will you know that you've discovered life?
So I would say that my second most important film is Contact. I don't know if you've seen it, but I've watched it half a dozen times. Jill Tarter is a personal friend who was the inspiration for the Jodie Foster character. There's an example of how we discovered life. It was a signal that came in that had encoded the information. They're chemical signatures that we could look for in the spectrum of the atmosphere. So chlorofluorohydrocarbons could be detected in the atmosphere. Oxygen is a good signal of life, not necessarily advanced life. The telescope that we want to build would actually be able to make, over a series of many days, could make images of the surface. So we could see, for example, the heat signature of the Los Angeles basin. If you look at the Earth from a satellite, there's a big red hotspot which is 4 or 5 degrees hotter than the average surroundings, which is a signature of life is the use of energy. That's a common signature. We to process information requires energy, and if information is life, then energy and heat are life. So a very telling signature would be the construction, and that's built into the concept of looking at a thermal picture at a sensitive level of a planet and seeing, oh, that looks like cities, and that looks like the localization of civilization. So there are actually several ways of looking for techno-signatures, but also biosignatures of less advanced life.
Beautiful. Sarah, final question. I'm a dad. I'm not sure if you're a parent or not, but I have a daughter, just turned 15. And I wrote a children's book that you beautifully endorsed called Tonight I Met a Deva, a Buddhist angel.
Yeah.
And I've had this emerging love affair with children over the last several years. And the child, you know, in everyone, even if you're older.
Yeah.
And the unborn, because I'm a Buddhist by heart. I do believe in the multiplicity of dimensions, and you know, I think it was Einstein that said the greatest evidence of rebirth is birth itself.
Yeah.
There's life, you know that. And how would you say a few words? What would you say to the children who may watch us, you, both who are in their teens or early 20s or early teens or younger even, how to support them emerging into the fields that you most respect in your professional life, astronomy, physics. What's required at a young age to nurture the dream of that exploration, to be an astronomer, to look for life in the universe? Is there a calculus? Is there arithmetic? Is there a vocabulary?
I don't think that the world needs lots of astronomers. The world needs people that think. And here's what we need. We need to be fearless, and that's what we're born with. I have a granddaughter who was a little too fearless. She fell off of the monkey bars and she broke her femur, and she's in a cast for 6 weeks. And I hope that experience doesn't turn her away from climbing the monkey bars. Our life experience where we have pain tends to shape us and put us into a box and make us fearful. And that's the value of being young, is not having had yourself pushed into the box by pain or by suffering. And that's what we have to have. We have to have, I have to die to leave room for the children that have that fearlessness, which pushes the envelope of what we're trying to do. So it is to be fearless. You're going to die. You can't avoid dying. Accumulating wealth is not going to change the fact that you're going to die. So make your life as big as you can make it. Make life big.
Beautiful. Jeff, a great honor to speak with you, my friend. And may I encourage those of you who have watched this, share it and enjoy the conversation. And from my heart to yours, thank you for tuning in. And again, thank you for your good work, Jeff. To be continued. Thank you. Just watching, I just saw him.
Oh, that was fun.